Alright, y'all. This delicate love story is faithful to the spirit of old Japan. A young wife dies and, in dying, promises to be reincarnated in a woman's body, again, to be the young man's wife. Now, destiny is the ruling deity, even after death. True, as a son, it was the young man's duty to marry and have sons. Life goes on, and yet love rules under the laws of fate. The sense of mystery and of the inner meaning is expressed in the closing lines of this little gem of a fairy tale. Now, this story here is called The Story of Old Tai. A long time ago, in the town of Nagata, in the province of Echizen, there lived a man called Nagayo Chozai. Nagayo was the son of a physician and was educated for his father's profession. At an early age, he had been betrothed to a girl called Otai, the daughter of one of his father's friends. Now, both families had agreed that the wedding should take place as soon as Nagayo had finished his studies. But Otai's health proved to be weak, and in her 15th year, she was attacked by a fatal illness. When she became aware that she must die, she went to Nagayo to bid him farewell. As he knelt by her bedside, she said to him, "Nagayo-sama, my betrothed, we were promised to each other from the time of our childhood, and we were to have been married at the end of this year. But now I'm going to die. The gods know what is best for us. If I were able to live for some years longer, I could only continue to be a curse of trouble and grief for others. With this frail body, I could not be a good wife, and therefore, even to wish to live for your sake would be a very selfish wish. I am quite resigned to die, and I want you to promise that you will not grieve. Besides, I think we shall meet again." "Indeed, we shall meet again," Nagayo answered earnestly. "And in that pure land, there will be no pain of separation." "Nay, nay," she responded softly. "I meant not the pure land. I believe that we are destined to meet again in this world, although I shall be buried tomorrow." Nagayo looked at her wonderingly and saw her smile at his wonder. She continued in her gentle, dreamy voice, "Yes, I mean in this world, in your own present life, Nagayo-sama, providing indeed that you wish it. Only for this thing to happen, I must again be born a girl and grow up to womanhood. So you would have to wait. But my promised husband, you are now only 19 years old." Eager to soothe her dying moments, he answered tenderly, "To wait for you, my betrothed, will be no less a joy than a duty. We are pledged to each other for the time of 7 existences." "But you doubt?" she questioned, watching his face. "My dear one," he answered, "I doubt whether I should be able to know you in another body, under another name, unless you can give me a sign or token." "That I cannot do," she said. "Only the gods and the Buddha know how and where we shall meet. But I am sure, very, very sure, that if you are not unwilling to receive me, I shall be able to come back to you. Remember these words." She ceased to speak, and her eyes closed, and she was dead. Nagayo had been sincerely attached to Otai, and his grief was deep. He had a mortuary tablet made, inscribed with her name, and he placed the tablet in his shrine and every day set offerings before it. He thought a great deal about the strange things that Otai had said to him just before her death. And in the hope of pleasing her spirit, he wrote a solemn promise to wed her if she could ever return to him in another body. This written promise he sealed with his seal and placed it in the shrine beside the mortuary tablet of Otai. Nevertheless, since Negayo was an only son, it was necessary that he should marry. He soon found himself obliged to yield to the wishes of his family and to accept a wife of his father's choosing. But after his marriage, he continued to set offerings before the tablet of Otai, and he never failed to remember her with affection. By degrees, however, her image became dim in his memory, like a dream that is hard to recall, and the years went by. Now during those years, many misfortunes came upon him. His parents died, then his wife and his only child, so that at last he found himself alone in the world. He abandoned his desolate home and set out on a long journey in the hope of forgetting his sorrows. Now one day, in the course of his travels, he arrived at Akayo, a mountain village famed for its thermal springs and for the beautiful scenery surrounding it. In the village inn at which he stopped, a young girl came to wait on him. At the first sight of her face, he felt his heart leap as never before. So strangely did she resemble Otai that he pinched himself to make sure he was not dreaming. As she went and came, bringing fire and food, or arranging the chamber of the guest, her every attitude and motion revived in him some gracious memory of the girl to whom he had been pledged in his youth. He spoke to her, and she responded in a soft, clear voice, whose sweetness saddened him with the memory of other days. Then, in great wonder, he questioned her. "Elder sister, so much do you look like a person whom I knew long ago, that I was startled when you first entered this room. Pardon me, therefore, for asking, what is your native place, and what is your name?" Immediately, and in the unforgotten voice of the dead girl, she thus made answer. "My name is Otai, and you are Nagayo Chozai of Echizan, my promised husband. 17 years ago I died in Nagata. Then you made in writing a promise to marry me if ever I came back to this world in the body of a woman, and you sealed that written promise with your seal and put it in the shrine beside the tablet inscribed with my name. And therefore I came back." As she uttered these last words, she fell unconscious. Nagayo married her, and the marriage was a happy one. But at no time afterward could she remember what she had told him in answer to his question at Akayo. Neither could she remember anything of her previous existence. The recollection of the former birth mysteriously kindled in the moment of that meeting, and again became obscured, and so it remained thereafter. Alright, y'all, this Russian fairy tale has a curiously modern atmosphere. Flying carpets are an ancient device, but here's a flying ship. How Simpleton found the mannequin who led him to discover the ship, and those who joined him as passengers and crew. How they found the king, and how Simpleton, in spite of being simple, managed to perform heroic deeds and marry the princess as his reward. Provide a stirring tale designed to encourage all simpletons. Now this here is the story of the flying ship. Now, once upon a time, there lived an old couple who had 3 sons. The other 2 were clever, but the third was a real dunce. Now, the clever sons were very fond of their mother, bought her fine clothes, and always spoke pleasantly to her. But the youngest was always getting in her way, and she had no patience with him. Now, one day it was announced in the village that the king had issued a decree offering his daughter, the princess, in marriage to whoever should build a ship that could fly. Immediately, the 2 elder brothers determined to try their luck and asked their parents' blessing. So the old mother got their clothes ready and gave them a store of provisions for their journey, not forgetting to add a bottle of brandy. When they had gone, poor Simpleton began to tease his mother to provision him as well and let him go too. "What would become of a dolt like you?" she answered. "Why, you would be eaten up by the wolves." But the foolish youth kept repeating, "I will go, I will go, I will go." Seeing that she could do nothing with him, the mother gave him a crust of bread and a bottle of water, and took no further heed of him. The simpleton set off on his way. When he had gone a short distance, he met a little old mannikin. They greeted each other, and the mannikin asked him where he was going. "I am off to the king's court," he answered. "He has promised to give his daughter to whoever can make a flying ship." "And can you make such a ship?" "Not I." "Then why in the world are you going?" "Can't tell," replied Simpleton. "Well, if that is the case," said the mannikin, "sit down beside me. We can rest for a little while and have something to eat. Give me what you have in your satchel." Now the poor simpleton was ashamed to show what was in it. He thought it best not to make a fuss, however, and so he opened the satchel and could scarcely believe his own eyes. For instead of the hard crust, there were 2 beautiful fresh rolls and some cold meat. He shared them with the mannikin, who licked his lips and said, "Now go into that wood and stop in front of the first tree. Bow 3 times and then strike the tree with your axe and fall on your knees to the ground with your face on the earth. Remain there till you are raised up. You will then find a ship at your side. Step into it and fly to the king's palace. If you meet anyone on the way, take him with you." Simpleton thanked the mannikin very kindly, bade him farewell, and went into the road. When he got to the first tree, he stopped in front of it, did everything just as he had been told, and kneeling on the ground with his face to the earth, he fell asleep. After a little time, he awoke. Rubbing his eyes, he saw a ready-made ship at his side, and at once got into it. Now the ship rose and soon was flying through the air. Simpleton, who was on the lookout, cast his eyes down to earth and saw a man beneath him on the road, who was kneeling with his ear upon the damp ground. "Hello," he called out. "What are you doing down there?" "I'm listening to what is going on in the world," replied the man. "Come with me in my ship," said Simpleton. The man was only too glad to do so. He got in, and the ship flew and flew and flew through the air, until again, from his lookout, Simpleton saw a man on the road below. This man was hopping on one leg, with his other leg tied up behind his ear. Simpleton hailed him. "Hello, what are you doing, hopping on one leg?" "I can't help it," the man replied. "I walk so fast, and unless I tied up one leg, I'd be at the end of the earth in a bound." "Come with us on my ship," Simpleton answered. The man made no objections and joined them, and the ship flew on and on and on until suddenly Simpleton, looking down on the road below, beheld a third man, who was aiming with a gun into the distance. "Hello," Simpleton shouted. What are you aiming at? As far as I can see, there's no bird in sight. What would be the good of my taking a near shot? Replied the man. I can hit beast or bird at 100-mile distance. That is the kind of shot I enjoy. Come into the ship with us, answered Simpleton. The man was only too glad to join them. He got in, and the ship flew on farther and farther until again Simpleton, from his lookout, saw a man on the road below, carrying on his back a basket full of bread. He waved to him. Hello, where are you going? To fetch bread for my breakfast. Bread? Why, you have a whole basket load of it on your back. That's nothing, answered the man. I can finish that in one mouthful. Then come along with us in my ship. The glutton joined the party, and the ship rose again into the air and flew up and onward until Simpleton, from his lookout, saw a man walking by the shore of a great lake, evidently searching for something. Hello, he cried. What are you seeking? I want water to drink. I'm thirsty, replied the man. Well, there's a whole lake in front of you. Why don't you drink some of that? Do you call that enough? Answered the other. Why, I could drink it up in one gulp. Well, come with us in the ship. The mighty drinker was added to the company, and the ship flew farther and even further, until again Simpleton looked out, and at this time he saw a man dragging a bundle of wood and walking through the forest beneath him. Hello, he shouted. Why are you carrying wood through a forest? This is not ordinary wood, answered the other. What sort of wood is it, then? Asked Simpleton. If you throw it upon the ground, said the man, it will be changed into an army of soldiers. Then come into the ship with us. He joined them, and away the ship flew, on and on and on. Once more Simpleton looked out, and this time he saw a man carrying straw on his back. Hello, where are you carrying that straw? To the village, said the man. Do you mean to say there is no straw in the village? Ah, but this is a peculiar straw. If you strew it about, even on the hottest summer day, the air at once becomes cold and snow falls, and the people freeze. Of course, Simpleton asked him also to join them. At last, the ship with its strange crew arrived at the king's court. Now the king was having his dinner, but at once he dispatched one of his courtiers to find out what the huge, strange new bird could be that had come flying through the air. The courtier peeped into the ship and instantly went back to the king and told him that it was a flying ship manned by a few peasants. Then the king remembered his royal oath, but he made up his mind that he would never let the princess marry a poor peasant. He thought and thought of how to break his oath, and then said to himself, I will give him some impossible tasks to perform. That will be the best way of getting rid of him. There and then he decided to send a courier to Simpleton with the command that he fetch the king the healing water from the world's end before he had finished his dinner. While the king was still instructing the courtier in exactly what he was to say, the first man of the ship's company, the one with the miraculous power of hearing, overheard the king's words and at once reported them to poor Simpleton. Alas, alas, cried Simpleton, what am I to do now? It would take me at least a year, possibly my whole life, to find the water. Never fear, said his fleet-footed comrade. I will fetch what the king wants. Just then the courier arrived bearing the king's command. Tell his majesty, said Simpleton, that his orders shall be obeyed. Forthwith the swift runner unbound the foot that was strung up behind his ear and started off. And in less than no time he reached the world's end and drawn the healing water from the well. Dear me, he thought to himself, This is rather tiring. I'll just rest for a few minutes. It will be some little time yet before the king has got to dessert." He threw himself down on the grass, and as the sun was very dazzling, he closed his eyes and in a few seconds had fallen sound asleep. Now, in the meantime, all the ship's crew were anxiously awaiting him. The king's dinner would soon be finished, and their comrade had not yet returned. So the man with the marvelously quick hearing lay down, put his ear to the ground, and listened. "That's a nice sort of fellow," he suddenly exclaimed. "He's lying on the ground snoring hard." At this, the marksman seized his gun, took aim, and fired in the direction of the world's end, in order to awaken the sluggard. Now, a moment later, the swift runner reappeared and stepped on board the ship, handed the hill and water to Simpleton. While the king was still sitting at the table finishing his dinner, he heard the news that his orders had been obeyed to the letter. What was to be done now? The king determined to think of a still more impossible task. So he told another courtier to go to Simpleton with the command that he and his comrades were in instantly to eat up 12 oxen and 12 tons of bread. Once more the sharp-eared comrade overheard the king's words while he was still talking to the courtier, and he reported them to Simpleton. "Alas, alas," poor Simpleton sighed. "What in the world shall I do? Why, it would take us a year, possibly our whole lives, to eat up 12 oxen and 12 tons of bread." Never fear," said the glutton. "It will scarcely be enough for me. I'm so hungry." When the courtier arrived with the royal message, he was told to take back word to the king that his orders would be obeyed. The 12 roasted oxen and 12 tons of bread were brought alongside the ship, and at one sitting the glutton devoured it all. "I call that a meal, a small meal," he said. "I wish they'd brought me some more." Next, the king commanded the 40 casks of wine, each containing 40 gallons, were to be drunk up on the spot by Simpleton and his party. When the sharp-eared comrade overheard these words and repeated them to Simpleton, he was in despair. "Alas, alas," he exclaimed, "what is to be done? It would take us a year, possibly our whole lives, to drink so much." "Never fear," said his thirsty comrade. "I'll drink it all up at a gulp. See if I don't." Sure enough, when the 40 casks of wine containing 40 gallons each were brought alongside the ship, they disappeared down the thirsty comrade's throat in no time. When the casks were empty, he remarked, "Why, I'm still thirsty. I'd have been glad to have had more." Then the king took counsel with himself and sent an order to Simpleton that he was to have a bath in a bathroom at the royal palace, and after that the betrothal should take place. Now this bathroom was built of iron, and the king gave orders that it was to be heated to such a degree that it would suffocate Simpleton. When the poor silly youth entered the room, he discovered that the iron walls were red hot. But fortunately his comrade with the straw on his back had followed him in, and when the door was shut behind them, he scattered the straw about. Suddenly the red-hot walls cooled down and became so cold that Simpleton could scarcely bear to take a bath, and all the water in the room froze. Simpleton climbed up on the stove, and wrapping himself in the bath blankets, lay there the whole night. In the morning, when the king's men opened the door, there he lay, safe and sound, singing cheerfully to himself. Now when this strange tale was told to the king, he was sad indeed, not knowing what he should do to get rid of so undesirable a son-in-law. Suddenly a brilliant idea occurred to him. Tell the rascal to raise me an army. Now, at this instant," he exclaimed to one of his courtiers, "inform him at once of my royal will," and to himself he added, "I think I shall do for him this time. As on the former occasions, the quick-eared comrade overheard the king's command, and he repeated it to Simpleton. "Alas, alas," Simpleton groaned. "Now I am quite done for." "Not at all," replied the comrade who had dragged the bundle of wood through the forest. "Have you forgotten me?" In the meantime, the courtier, who had run all the way from the palace, reached the ship panting and breathless, and delivered the king's message. "Good," Simpleton said. "I will raise an army for the king." And he drew himself up. "But if, after that, the king refuses to accept me as his son-in-law, I will wage war against him and carry the princess off by force." During the night, Simpleton and his comrade went together into a big field, not forgetting to take the bundle of wood with them. This the comrade spread out in all directions, and in a moment a mighty army stood upon the spot. Regiment on regiment of foot and horse soldiers. The bugles sounded and the drums beat, the chargers neighed, and their riders held their lances in position while the foot soldiers presented arms. Now in the morning, when the king awoke, he was startled by warlike sounds. The bugles and drums, the clatter of horses, and the shouts of the soldiers. Stepping to the window, he saw the lances gleaming in the sunlight and the glittering armor. The proud monarch said to himself, "I am powerless in comparison with this man." So he sent Simpleton royal robes and costly jewels and commanded him to come to the palace to be married to the princess. When his son-in-law put on the royal robes, he looked so grand and stately that it was impossible to recognize poor Simpleton. So changed was he. The princess fell in love with him as soon as ever she saw him. Now never before had so grand a wedding been seen, and there was so much food and wine that even the glutton and the thirsty comrade had enough to eat and drink. Now this fairy tale tells the story of a beautiful little boy, how he grew up to become the joy and support of an old man and his wife who lived in the hills of Japan. Do not be surprised that the child was found in a peach. Much of China's legend and lore floated to Japan, where little peachling was born in China, and in China the peach was a symbol of fertility. It is quite logical, therefore, for a peach to split open and reveal a baby boy. Now, one of the charms of many fairy tales, or perhaps only one of the tricks, is the soothing and yet diverting technique of repetition. It is used very skillfully in this story to describe the actions of the ape, the pheasant, and the dog, all friends of man, at least here in the case of Little Peachling. Now this here's the adventures of Little Peachling, and we're going to continue on with this story in just a second. Now, many hundreds of years ago, there lived an honest old woodcutter and his wife. One fine morning, the old man went off to the hills with his axe to gather a bundle of firewood, while his wife went down to the river to wash the clothes. There she saw a peach floating down the stream. She picked it up and carried it home with her, thinking to give it to her husband to eat when he came home from his labors. When the old man came down from the hills, the good wife set the peach before him. Just as he was about to eat it, the fruit split in two, and a little boy was born into the world. The old couple took the babe and brought it up as their very own, and because he had been born in a peach, they called him Little Peachling. Now Little Peachling grew up to be strong and brave, and at last one day he said to his old foster parents, "I am going to the Ogre's Island, to carry off the riches that they have stored there. Please make me some millet dumplings for my journey. Now the old folks ground the millet and made the dumplings, and little Peachling, after bidding them an affectionate goodbye, cheerfully set out on his travels. As he was journeying on, he met an ape. "Kaya, kaya, kaya," the ape gibbered. "Where are you off to, Master Peachling?" "I'm going to the ogre's island to carry off their treasure," answered little Peachling. "What are you carrying in your bundle?" "I'm carrying the very best millet dumplings in all Japan." "If you'll give me one, I will go with you," said the ape. Little Peachling gave one of his dumplings to the ape, who took it and followed him. Now when he had gone a little farther, he heard a pheasant calling, "Can, can, can." "Where are you off to, Master Peachling?" Little Peachling answered as before, and the pheasant, having begged and obtained a millet dumpling, also entered his service and followed him. Now a little while after, they met a dog. "Bow, wow, wow, whither away, Master Peachling?" "I'm going to the ogre's island to carry off their treasure." "If you will give me one of your nice millet dumplings, I will go with you," said the dog. With all my heart," said little Peachling. So he went on his way, the ape, the pheasant, and the dog following right after him. Now when they got to the ogre's island, the pheasant flew over the castle gate, and the ape clambered over the castle wall, while little Peachling, leading the dog, forced in the gate and entered the castle. There they had a tremendous battle with the ogres, overcame them, and took their king prisoner. All the ogres did homage to little Peachling and brought out the treasures which they had collected these many years. There were caps and coats to make their wearers invisible, jewels that governed the ebb and flow of the tide, coral, musk, emeralds, amber, and tortoiseshell, as well as gold and silver. All these were spread before little Peachling by the conquered ogres. Now little Peachling shared his treasure with his companions, the ape, the pheasant, and the dog. He then set out for home, laden with riches, and he maintained his foster parents in peace and plenty for the remainder of their lives. This here is a spacious tale, wide as the plains and mountains of Russia, and his landscape is as varied. Now horses were part of the Russian scene, and in this story horses travel fast and far. A good king, a wicked magician, a young prince, a lovely girl provide the necessary elements of terror and beauty, evil and good. The lines are simple, hard and clear, and present a faithful picture of Russian character. Now, of course, the ending is happy, for this is a fairy tale. This here is the story of King Kojata. There was once upon a time a king called Kojata, whose beard was so long that it reached below his knees. 3 years had passed since his marriage, and he lived very happily with his wife. But heaven had not granted him an heir, which grieved the king greatly. Now one day he set forth from his capital in order to make a journey through his kingdom. He traveled for nearly a year through the different parts of his territory, and then, having seen all there was to be seen, he turned homeward. As the day was hot and sultry, he commanded his servants to pitch tents in the open field, and there await the cool of the evening. Now suddenly he was seized with a frightful thirst, and as he saw no water near, he mounted his horse and rode through the fields looking for a spring. Before long he came to a well filled to the brim with water clear as crystal, on the surface of which a golden jug was floating. Now King Kajata at once tried to seize the vessel, first with his right hand and then with his left, but the wretched thing always eluded his efforts and refused to let itself be caught. With one hand and then with both did the king try to seize it, but like a fish the jug always slipped through his fingers and bobbed away out of sight, only to reappear at some other place to mock him. "A plague on you," said King Kojata. "I could quench my thirst without you." And bending over the well, he plunged his face, beard and all, right into the water, which he lapped up greedily. But when he had satisfied his thirst, he could not lift his head, because someone was holding his beard fast in the water. "Who's there? Let me go," cried King Kojata. But there was no answer. Only an awful face looked up from the bottom of the well, with two great green eyes glowing like emeralds, and a wide mouth that reached from ear to ear, showing two rows of gleaming white teeth. And the king's beard was held not by mortal hands, but by two claws. At last a hoarse voice sounded from the depths. "Your efforts are all in vain, King Kojata. I will let you go, only on condition that you give me something you know nothing about yet, which you will find on your return home." The king did not pause to ponder long, for what thought he could be in my palace without my knowing about it? The thing is absurd. So he answered quickly, "Yes, I promise that you shall have it." The voice replied, "Very well, but it will go ill with you if you fail to keep your promise." Then the claws relaxed their hold and the face disappeared in the depths. The king drew his chin out of the water and, shaking himself off like a dog, he mounted his horse and rode thoughtfully home with his retinue. When they approached the capital, all the people came out to meet them with great joy and acclamation. And when the king reached his palace, the queen met him on the threshold. Beside her stood the prime minister, holding a little cradle in his hands, in which lay a newborn child as beautiful as the day. Then the whole thing dawned on the king, and groaning deeply, he muttered to himself, "So this is what I did not know about." And the tears rolled down his cheeks. Now all the courtiers gathered round were much amazed at the king's grief, but no one dared to ask him the cause. He took the child in his arms and kissed it tenderly. Then, laying it in its cradle, he determined to control his emotions, and he busied himself with kingly duties. Now the king kept his secret, although his grave, careworn expression escaped no one's notice. In constant dread that his child would be taken from him, poor King Kojata knew no rest night or day. Now time passed, however, and nothing happened. The prince grew up into a beautiful youth, and at last the king himself forgot all about the promise he had made so long ago. One day the prince went out hunting, and while pursuing wild boar, he lost the other huntsman and found himself alone in a dark wood. Now the trees grew so thick and close together that it was almost impossible to see through them. But directly in front of him lay a little patch of meadowland, overgrown with thistles and rank weeds, in the center of which was a lime tree. Suddenly a rustling sound was heard in the hollow of the tree, and an extraordinarily old man with green eyes and chin crept out of it. "A fine day, Prince Milan," he said. "You have kept me waiting a good number of years. It is time you paid me a visit." "Who are you, in the name of wonder?" demanded the astonished prince. "You'll find out soon enough. But in the meantime, do as I bid you. Greet your father, King Kajata, for me, and remind him of his debt. The time has long passed since it was due, and now he will have to pay it. Farewell for the present. We shall meet again." With these words, the old man disappeared into the tree, and the prince, rather startled, returned home and told his father all that he had seen and heard. Now the king grew as white as a sheet when he heard the prince's story, and he said, "Woe is me, my son! The time has come when we must part." With a heavy heart, he told the prince what had happened at the time of his birth. "Don't distress yourself, dear father," answered Prince Milan. "Things are never as bad as they look. Only give me a horse for my journey, and I wager you'll soon see me back again." The king gave him a sword and a beautiful charger with golden stirrups. The queen hung a little cross round his neck, and after much weeping and lamentation, the prince bade them all farewell and set forth. He rode for 2 days, and on the third he came to a lake as smooth as glass and as clear as crystal. Not a breath of wind moved, not a leaf stirred. All was silent as the grave. But on the still bosom of the lake, 30 ducks with brilliant plumage swam about. Not far from the shore, Prince Milan noticed 30 little white garments lying on the grass, and dismounted from his horse, he crept down under the high bulrushes that grew round the lake, took one of the garments, and hid himself behind them. The ducks swam about all over the lake, dived down into its depths, and rose again, then paddled on the surface. At last, tired of disporting themselves, they swam to the shore, and 29 of them put on their little white garments, and instantly turned into as many beautiful maidens. When they had finished dressing, they disappeared. Only the 30th little duck could not come ashore. It swam about close to the land, and giving out a piercing cry, it stretched its neck timidly, gazed wildly about, and then dived under again. Prince Milan's heart was so moved with pity for the poor little creature that he came out from behind the bulrushes to see if he could help it. Now, as soon as the duck perceived him, it cried in a human voice, "Oh, dear Prince Milan, for the love of heaven, give me back my garment, and I will be so grateful to you." The prince put the little garment on the bank beside her and stepped back into the bulrushes. In a few seconds, a beautiful girl in a white robe stood before him, so fair and sweet and young that no words could describe her. Giving the prince her hand, she said, "Many thanks, Prince Milan, for your courtesy. I am the daughter of a wicked magician, and my name is Hyacinthia. My father has 30 young daughters and is a mighty ruler in the underworld, with many castles and great riches. He has been expecting you for ages, but you need have no fear if you will only follow my advice. As soon as you are in my father's presence, throw yourself at once on the ground and approach him on your knees. Do not mind if he stamps and curses and swears. I'll attend to the rest. And in the meantime, we had better be off." With these words, the beautiful Hyacinthia tapped the ground with her little foot, and the earth opened, and they both sank down into the lower world. The palace of the magician was all hewn out of a single ruby, lighting up the whole surrounding region. Prince Milan walked into it gaily. Now the magician himself sat on a throne, a sparkling crown on his head. His eyes blazed like a green fire, and instead of hands he had claws. As soon as Prince Milan entered, he flung himself on his knees. The magician stamped his feet, glared frightfully out of his green eyes, and cursed so loudly that the whole underworld shook. But the prince, mindful of the maiden's counsel, was not the least afraid as he approached the throne, still on his knees. At last the magician laughed aloud and said, "You rogue, you have been well advised to make me laugh. I will be your enemy no longer. Welcome to the underworld. All the same, for your delay in coming here, we must demand 3 services from you. For today you may go, but tomorrow I shall have something more to say to you." Then two servants led Prince Milan to a beautiful apartment where he lay down to rest on the soft bed that had been prepared for him, and was soon fast asleep. Now early the next morning, the magician sent for him and said, "Let's see now what you have learned. In the first place, you must build me a palace tonight. The roof of purest gold, the walls of marble, and the windows of crystal. All around it, you must lay out a beautiful garden with fish ponds and artistic waterfalls. If you do all this, I will reward you richly. But if you don't, you shall lose your head." "Oh, you wicked monster," thought Prince Milan. "You might as well have put me to death at once." Sadly, he returned to his room, and with bent head sat brooding over his cruel fate till evening. When it grew dark, a little bee flew by, and knocking at the window, said, "Open and let me in." Now Milan quickly opened the window, and as soon as the bee entered, it changed into the beautiful Hyacinthia. "Good evening, Prince Milan. Why are you so sad?" "How can I help being sad? Your father threatens me with death, and I see myself already without a head." "And what have you made up your mind to do?" "There's nothing to be done, and after all, I suppose one can only die once." "Now, don't be so foolish, my dear prince. There's no need to despair. Go to bed now, and when you wake up tomorrow morning, the palace will be built. Then you must walk around it, giving a tap here and there on the walls to look as if you had just finished building it." It all turned out just as she had said. As soon as it was daylight, Prince Milan stepped out of his room, and there stood the palace, a work of art down to the smallest detail. The magician himself was not a little astonished at his beauty. "Now, well, you certainly are a splendid workman," he said to the prince. "I see you are very clever with your hands. But now I must see if you are equally accomplished with your head. I have 30 daughters in my house, all beautiful princesses. Tomorrow I will place the whole 30 in a row. You must walk past them 3 times, and the 3rd time you must show me which is my youngest daughter, Hyacinthia. If you don't guess right, you will lose your head. This time you've made a mistake, thought Prince Milan, and going to his room, he sat down at the window. Just fancy my not recognizing the beautiful Hyacinthia. Why, that's the easiest thing in the world. Not so easy as you'd think, cried the little bee, who was flying past. If I were not here to help you, you'd never guess. We are 30 sisters so exactly alike that our own father can hardly tell us apart. Then what am I to do? Asked Prince Milan. Listen, answered Hyacinthia. You will recognize me by a tiny fly I shall have on my left cheek. But be careful, for you might easily make a mistake. The next day the magician again commanded Prince Milan to be brought before him. His daughters were all standing in a row in front of him, dressed exactly alike, with their eyes bent on the ground. Now, you genius, said the magician, look at these beauties 3 times, and then tell us which is the princess Hyacinthia. Prince Milan went past them, looking at each one closely, but they were all so precisely alike that they appeared to be one face reflected in 30 mirrors. The fly was nowhere to be seen. The second time he passed them, he still saw nothing. But the third time, he perceived a little fly stealing down the cheek of one princess. Then the prince seized the girl's hand and cried out, This is the princess Hyacinthia. You are right again, said the magician in amazement. But I have still another task for you to do. Before this candle burns to the socket, you must have made me a pair of boots reaching to my knees. If they are not finished in that time, off comes your head. The prince returned to his room in despair, and the princess Hyacinthia came to him once more in the likeness of a bee, and asked, Why so sad, Prince Milan? How can I help being sad? This time your father has sent me an impossible task. Before a candle burns to the socket, I am to make a pair of boots. What does a prince know of shoemaking? But if I cannot do it, I lose my head. And what do you mean to do? Asked Hyacinthia. Well, what is there to be done? What he demands I can't and won't do, so he must just make an end of me. Not so, dearest. I love you, and you shall marry me. And I'll either save your life or die with you. We must fly now, as quickly as we can, for there is no other way of escape. With these words, she breathed on the window, and her breath froze on the pane. Then she led Milan out of the room, shut the door, and threw the key away. Hand in hand, they hurried toward the very same spot where they had descended into the lower world. Soon they reached the banks of the lake, where Prince Milan's charger was still grazing on the grass that grew near the water. The horse no sooner recognized his master than he neighed with joy and sprang towards him. He stood still while Prince Milan and Hyacinthia jumped on his back. Then he sped away like an arrow shot from a bow. In the meantime, the magician was waiting impatiently for the prince, for the appointed time was past. Enraged by the delay, he sent his servants to fetch him. The servants came to the door, finding it locked. They knocked, and the frozen breath on the window replied in Prince Milan's voice, I am coming directly. With this answer, they returned to the magician. When the prince still did not appear, he sent his servants a second time to bring him. The frozen breath always gave the same answer, but the prince never came. At last, the magician lost all patience and ordered the door burst open. But when the servants did so, they found the room empty, and the frozen breath laughed aloud. Out of his mind with rage, the magician ordered the prince to be pursued. Then a wild chase began. "I hear horses, hoofs behind us," said Hyacinthia to the prince. Milan sprang from the saddle, put his ear to the ground, and listened. "Yes," he answered, "they are pursuing us and are quite close." "Then no time must be lost," said Hyacinthia, and she immediately turned herself into a river, Prince Milan into an iron bridge, and the charger into a black bird. Behind the bridge, the road branched off into three. Now the magician's servants hurried after the fresh tracks, but when they came to the bridge, they hesitated. There were no more footprints, and they did not know which of the three roads to take. In fear and trembling, they returned to tell the magician what had happened. He flew into a dreadful rage when he saw them and screamed out, "Oh, you fools! The river and bridge, these were they. Go back and bring them to me at once, or it will be the worse for you." When the pursuit began afresh, "I hear horse hoofs," sighed Hyacinthia. The prince dismounted and put his ear to the ground. "They are already quite near." In a moment, the Princess Hyacinthia had changed herself, the prince, and his charger into a thick wood where 1,000 paths and roads crossed each other. Their pursuers entered the forest, but searched in vain for Prince Milan and his bride. At last, the searchers found themselves back at the same spot they had started from, and in despair they returned once more with empty hands to the magician. "Then I'll go after the wretches myself," he shouted. "Bring a horse at once. They shall not escape me." Once more the beautiful Hyacinthia murmured, "I hear horses' hoofs quite near." And the prince answered, "They are pursuing us hotly and are quite close. We are lost now, for that is my father himself. But at the first church we come to, his power ceases, and he may chase us no farther. Hand me your cross." Prince Milan loosened from his neck the little gold cross his mother had given him, and as soon as Hyacinthia had grasped it, she changed herself into a church, Milan into a monk, and the horse into a belfry. They had hardly done this when the magician and his servants rode up. "Did you see no one pass by on horseback, Reverend Father?" he asked the monk. "Prince Milan and Princess Hyacinthia have just passed. They stopped for a few minutes in the church to say their prayers, and bade me light this wax candle for you and give you their love." "I'd like to wring their necks," cried the magician, and made all haste home, where he had every one of his servants beaten within an inch of their lives. Now Prince Milan rode on slowly with his bride without fearing further pursuit. The sun was setting, and its last rays lit up a large city that loomed ahead. Suddenly, the prince was seized with an ardent desire to enter it. "Oh, my beloved," implored Hyacinthia, "please don't go, for I fear some evil." "What are you afraid of?" asked the prince. "We will only look at what's to be seen in the town for an hour, and then we'll continue our journey to my father's kingdom." "The town is easy to enter, but more difficult to leave," sighed Hyacinthia. "Yet let it be as you wish. Go, and I will await you here. But I will first change myself into a white millstone. Only, I pray you, be very careful. The king and queen of the town will come out to meet you, leading a little child with them. Whatever you do, don't kiss the child, or you will forget me and all that has happened to us. I will wait for you here for 3 days." The prince hurried to the town, but Hyacinthia remained on the road in her disguise as a white milestone. The first day passed, and then the second, and at last the third. But Prince Milan did not return, for he had not taken Hyacintia's advice. The king and queen had come out to meet him, as she had said they would, leading with them a lovely fair-haired little girl whose eyes shone like two clear stars. Now the child at once caressed the prince, who, carried away by her beauty, bent down and kissed her on the cheek. From that moment, his memory became a blank, and he forgot all about the beautiful Hyacinthia. Now when the prince did not return, poor Hyacinthia wept bitterly, and changing herself from a millstone into a little blue field flower, she said, "I will grow here on the wayside, till some passer-by tramples me underfoot." And one tear remained, a sparkling dewdrop on the little blue flower. Now it happened shortly after this that an old man passed by and saw the flower. Delighted with its beauty, he dug it up carefully by the roots and carried it home. He put it in a pot and watered and tended the little plant carefully. And now the most extraordinary thing happened. For from this moment everything in the old man's house was changed. When he awoke in the morning, he always found his room tidy, in such beautiful order that not a speck of dust was to be seen anywhere. When he came home at midday, he found a table laid out with the most delicious food, and he had only to sit down and enjoy it to his heart's content. At first, he was merely surprised and delighted, but after a time, he became a little uneasy, and he went to an old witch to ask for her advice. The witch said, "Get up before the cock crows and watch carefully till you see something move. And then throw this cloth quickly over it, and you'll see what will happen." All night the old man never closed his eye. When the first ray of light entered the room, he noticed that the little blue flower began to tremble, and at last it rose out of the pot and flew about the room, put everything in order, swept away the dust, and lit the fire. In great haste, the old man sprang from his bed and covered the flower with the cloth the old witch had given him. And in a moment, the beautiful Princess Hyacinthia stood before him. "What have you done?" she cried. "Why have you called me back to life, since my bridegroom, the handsome Prince Milan, has deserted me?" "Prince Milan is going to be married," replied the old man. "Everything is being made ready for the feast, and the invited guests are flocking to the palace from all sides." The beautiful Hyacinthia cried bitterly when she heard this. Then she dried her tears and went into the town dressed as a peasant woman. She went straight to the king's kitchen, where the white-aproned cooks were running about in a great confusion. The princess went up to the head cook and said, "Dear cook, please listen to my request, and let me make a wedding cake for Prince Milan." The busy cook was about to refuse her demand and order her out of the kitchen, but the words died on his lips when he turned and beheld the beautiful Hyacinthia. And he answered politely, "You have just come in the nick of time, fair maiden. Bake your cake, and I myself will lay it before Prince Milan." The cake was soon made. The invited guests were already thronging around the table when the head cook entered the room bearing a beautiful wedding cake on a silver dish and laid it before Prince Milan. The guests were all lost in admiration, for the cake was indeed a work of art. Prince Milan at once proceeded to cut it open. To his surprise, 2 white doves flew out, and one said to the other, "My dear mate, do not fly away, and leave me and forget me, as Prince Milan forgot his beloved Hyacinthia." Milan sighed deeply when he heard what the little dove had said. Then he jumped up suddenly from the table and ran to the door, where he found the beautiful Hyacinthia waiting for him. Outside stood his faithful charger, pawing the ground. Without pausing for a moment, Milan and Hyacinthia mounted him and galloped as fast as they could into the country of King Kajata. The king and queen received them with such joy as had never been seen before, and they all lived happily for the rest of their lives. All right, y'all, we're doing another story here. Now, this fairy tale from old China tells of a son who was so faithful to his dead father's memory that he sold himself into slavery in order to build him a fine tomb. Heaven rewarded this filial act in ways of its own. A goddess came down from heaven and, changing herself into a mortal woman, became Chi Nu's wife. In so doing, she bestowed upon him life's two best gifts, his own freedom and a son as beautiful as herself. This is the legend of Chi Nu. Now, Tong Yong's mother died while he was yet an infant, and when he became a youth of 19 years, his father also passed away, leaving him utterly alone in the world and without resources of any sort. Being a very poor man, Tong's father had put himself in great straits to educate the lad, and had not been able to lay by even one copper coin of his earnings. Tong lamented greatly to find himself so destitute that he could not honor the memory of that good father by having the customary rites of burial performed and a carved tomb erected on a propitious site. Only the poor are friends of the poor, and among all those whom Tong knew, there was no one able to assist him in defraying the expenses of the funeral. In one way alone could the youth obtain money. This was by selling himself as a slave to some rich landowner, and this he at last decided to do. Now, in vain, his friends did their utmost to dissuade him. They attempted him to delay his sacrifice by making him beguiling promises of future aid, but to no purpose. Tong only replied that he would sell his freedom 100 times if it were possible, rather than suffer his father's memory to remain unhonored, even for a brief season. Furthermore, confident in his youth and strength, he determined to put a high price on his servitude, a price which would enable him to build a handsome tomb, but which would be well nigh impossible for him ever to repay. Accordingly, he repaired to the broad public place where slaves and debtors were exposed for sale, and seated himself upon a bench of stone, having affixed to his shoulders a placard inscribed with the terms of his servitude and the last of his qualifications as a laborer. Many who read the characters on the placard smiled disdainfully at the price asked and passed on without a word. Others lingered only to question him out of simple curiosity. Now, some commended him with hollow praise, some openly mocked his unselfishness and laughed at his childish piety. Now, thus many hours wearily passed, and Tong had almost despaired of finding a master, when there rode by a high official of the province, a grave and handsome man, lord of 1,000 slaves and owner of vast estates. Reining in his Tartar horse, the official halted to read the placard. He did not smile or advise or ask any questions, but having observed the price asked and the fine strong limbs of the youth, he purchased him without further ado, merely ordering his attendant to pay the sum and see that the necessary papers were made out. Thus, Tong found himself enabled to fulfill the wish of his heart, to have a monument built which, although of small size, would delight the eyes of all who beheld it, because it would be designed by cunning artists and executed by skillful sculptors. Now, the pious rites were performed, the silver corn was placed in the mouths of the dead, and the white lanterns were hung at the door. The holy prayers were recited, and paper shapes of all things the departed might need in the land of the Genii were consumed in consecrated fire. After the geomancers and the necromancers had chosen a burial spot which no unlucky star could shine upon, a place of rest which no demon or dragon might ever disturb, the beautiful Chi was built. Phantom money was strewn along the way. The funeral procession departed from the dwelling of the dead, and with prayers and lamentations the mortal remains of Tong's good father were borne to the tomb. Then Tong entered the service of his purchaser, who allotted him a little hut to dwell in, and there Tong carried with him those wooden tablets bearing the ancestral names before which filial piety must daily burn the incense of prayer and perform the tender duties of family worship. Spring perfumed the land with flowers, and 3 times had been celebrated that festival of the dead which is called Siu Fan Ti, and 3 times had Tong swept and garnished his father's tomb and presented his fivefold offering of fruits and meats. Now the period of mourning passed, yet he did not cease to mourn. The years revolved with their many moons, bringing him no hour of joy, no day of happy rest. Yet he never lamented his servitude or failed to perform the rites of ancestral worship, until at last one day the fever of the rice fields overcame him, and he could not arise from his bed. His fellow laborers thought him destined to die. There was no one to care for his needs, inasmuch as the servants were busy with the duties of the household and the labor of the fields, departing to toil at sunrise and returning weary only after sundown. Now, while the sick youth slumbered one sultry noon in the fitful sleep of exhaustion, he dreamed that a strange and beautiful woman stood beside him and touched his forehead with the long, fine fingers of her shapely hand. At her cool touch, a strange, sweet shock passed through him, and all his veins tingled as if thrilled by new life. Opening his eyes in wonder, he saw bending over him the charming being of whom he had dreamed, and he knew that her hand really caressed his throbbing forehead. The flame of the fever was gone, a delicious coolness penetrated every fiber of his body, and the thrill of which he had dreamed still tingled in his blood. Even at the same moment, the eyes of the gentle visitor met his own, and he saw they were singularly beautiful, shining like splendid black jewels under brows curved like the wings of the swallow. Yet their calm gaze seemed to pass through him as light through crystal. A vague awe came upon him, so that the question which had risen to his lips found no utterance. Then she, still caressing him, smiled and said, "I have come to restore your strength and to be your wife. Arise and worship with me." Her clear voice had tones melodious as a bird's song, but in her gaze there was an imperious power which Tong felt he dared not resist. Rising from his bed, he was astounded to find his strength wholly restored. The cool, slender hand which held his own led him away so swiftly that he had little time for amazement. He would have given years of existence for courage to speak of his misery, to declare his utter inability to maintain a wife, but something irresistible in the long dark eyes of his companion forbade him to speak. As though his inmost thought had been discerned by the wondrous gaze, she said to him in the same clear voice, "I will provide." Shame made him blush at the thought of his wretched aspect and tattered apparel, until he observed that she also was poorly attired, like a woman of the people, wearing no ornament of any kind, not even shoes on her feet. Before he had yet spoken to her, they came before the ancestral tablets, and there she knelt with him, and they prayed and pledged their faith in a cup of wine. Brought he knew not from where. Thus together they worshipped heaven and earth, and thus she became his wife. It was a mysterious marriage, for neither on that day nor at any future time could Tom venture to ask his wife the name of her family, or of the place whence she came, nor could he answer any of the curious questions that his fellow laborers asked him concerning her. And she, moreover, never uttered a word about herself except to say that her name was Chi. Yet, although Tom had such awe of her that while her eyes were upon him, he was as one having no will of his own. He loved her utterly, and the thought of his serfdom ceased to weigh upon him from the hour of his marriage. As through magic, the little dwelling was transformed. Its misery was masked with charming paper devices, with dainty decorations created out of nothing by that pretty jugglery of which only women knows the secret. Each morning the young husband found a well-prepared and ample meal awaiting him, and each evening also when he returned from the fields. The wife sat all day at her loom, weaving silk after a fashion unlike anything that had ever been seen before in the province. For as she wove, the silk flowed from the loom like a slow current of glossy gold, bearing upon its undulations strange forms of violet and crimson and jewel green, shapes of ghostly horsemen riding on horses, and of phantom chariots dragon-drawn, and of standards of trailing cloud. In every dragon's heart glimmered a mystic pearl, in every rider's helmet sparkled a precious gem. And each day Chi would weave a great piece of this figured silk until the fame of her weaving spread abroad. From far and near people thronged to see the marvelous work. Silk merchants of great cities heard of it, and they sent messengers to Chi, asking her to weave for them and teach them her secret. Then she wove for them as they desired, and in return for the silver pieces they brought her. But when they begged her to teach them, she only laughed. "Assuredly I could never teach you," she said, "for no one among you has fingers like mine." And indeed no man could discern her fingers when she wove any more than he might behold the wings of a bee vibrating in swift flight. The seasons passed, and Tong never knew want so well did his beautiful wife fulfill her promise. "I will provide." The coins of bright silver brought by the silk merchants were piled up higher and higher in the great carved chest that Chi had bought for the storage of the household goods. Now one morning, when Tong, having finished his repast, was about to depart for the fields, Chi unexpectedly bade him remain. Opening the great chest, she took out and gave him a document written in the official characters called Li Shu, and Tong, looking at it, cried out for joy, for it was the certificate of his manumission. She had secretly purchased her husband's freedom with the price of her wondrous silks. "You shall labor no more for any master," she said, "but for your own sake only. I have also bought this dwelling with all it contains, and the tea fields to the south, and the mulberry groves close by, all of which are yours." Tong, beside himself for gratefulness, would have prostrated himself in worship before her, but she would not permit it. Thus he was made free, and prosperity came to him with his freedom. Whatsoever he gave to the sacred earth was returned to him centupled. His servants loved him and blessed the beautiful Chi, so silent and yet so kindly to all about her. Now the loom soon remained untouched, for Chi gave birth to a son, a boy so beautiful that Tong wept with delight when he looked upon him. Thereafter the wife devoted herself wholly to the care of the child. It soon became manifest that the boy was not less wonderful than his wonderful mother. In the 3rd month of his life he could speak, in the 7th month he could repeat by heart the proverbs of the sages and recite the holy prayers. Before the 11th month he could use the writing book brush with with skill and copy in shapely characters the precepts of Lao Tse. Even the priests of the temples came to behold the child and to converse with him, and they marveled at his charm and the wisdom of what he said. They blessed Tong, saying, "Surely this son is a gift from the Master of Heaven, a sign that the immortals love you. May your eyes behold 100 happy summers." It was now in the period of the 11th moon. The flowers had withered, the perfume of the summer had vanished, the winds were growing chill, and in Tong's home the evening fires were lighted. Long the husband and wife sat in the mellow glow, he speaking much of his hopes and joys, and of his son who was to be so grand a man, and of many other paternal thoughts, while she, speaking little, listened to his words and often turned her wonderful eyes upon him with an answering smile. Never had she seemed so beautiful, and Tong, watching her face, did not mark how the night waned, nor how the fire sank low, nor how the wind sang in the leafless trees outside. Suddenly, Chi arose, and in silence, she took his hand. She took his hand in hers and led him gently, as on the strange wedding morning, to the cradle where their boy slumbered, faintly smiling in his dreams. Now in that moment there came upon Tong the same strange fear that he had felt when Chi's eyes had first met his own, the vague fear that love and trust had calmed, but had never wholly cast out, like the fear of the gods. Unknowingly, as one yielding to the pressure of mighty invisible hands, he bowed himself low before her, kneeling as to a divinity. When he lifted his eyes again to her face, he closed them forthwith in awe, for she towered before him, taller than any mortal woman, and there was a glow about her as of sunbeams, and the light of her limbs shone through her garments. Her sweet voice came to him with all the tenderness of other hours, saying, "O my beloved, the moment has come when I must forsake you, for I was never of mortal born, and the invisible may incarnate themselves for a time only. Yet I leave the pledge of our love, this fair son, who shall ever be as faithful and as fond as you have been. Know, my beloved, that I was sent to you by the Master of Heaven in reward for your filial piety, and that I must now return to the glory of his house. I am the goddess Chi knew." Even as she ceased to speak, the great glow faded, and Tong, opening his eyes again, knew that she had vanished forever, mysteriously as past the winds of heaven, irrevocably as the light of a flame blown out. Yet all the doors were barred, all the windows unopened, and still the child slept, smiling in his sleep. Outside the darkness was breaking, the sky brightened swiftly, the night was past. With splendid majesty the east threw open high gates of gold for the coming of the sun, and illuminated by the glory of his coming, the vapors of morning wrought themselves into marvelous shapes of shifting color, into forms as strangely beautiful as the silken dreams woven in the loom of Chi Nhu. Alright, here is a Russian version of the tale of Hansel and Gretel, the wicked stepmother and the evil witch. Again, kindness is rewarded, for when the children share their bread and meat with bird and animal, these in return save the lives of the children. Now the father in such fairy tales is always a curiously remote character, apparently not much concerned with the fate of his children. Yet when they return triumphant after incredible hardships, he comes forward and assumes his proper role by driving out the stepmother and taking care of his children himself, to the happiness of all. Now this is called the witch. Now once upon a time there was a peasant whose wife died, leaving him with two children, twins, a boy and a girl. For some years the poor man lived on alone with his children, caring for them as best he could, but everything in the house seemed to go wrong without a woman to look after it. At last he made up his mind to marry again, feeling that a wife would bring peace and order to his household and take care of his motherless children. So he married, and In the following years, several children were born to him, yet peace and order did not come to the household. The stepmother was very cruel to the twins. She beat them and half-starved them and constantly drove them out of the house, for her one idea was to get them out of the way. All day she thought of nothing else, and at last an evil plan came into her head. She determined to send them out into the great gloomy wood where a wicked witch lived. One morning she said to them, "You have been such good children that I am going to send you to visit my granny who lives in a dear little hut in the wood. You will have to wait on her and serve her, but you will be well rewarded, for she will give you the best of everything." The children left the house together, and the little sister, who was very wise for her years, said to the brother, "We will first go and see our own dear grandmother and tell her where our stepmother is sending us." When the grandmother heard where they were going, she cried and said, "You poor motherless children, I pity you, and yet I can do nothing to help you. Your stepmother is not sending you to her granny, but to a wicked witch who lives in that great gloomy wood. Now listen to me, children. You must be civil and kind and never say a cross word to anyone, and never touch a crumb belonging to anyone else. Who knows? Help may yet be sent to you." And she gave her grandchildren a jug of milk and a piece of ham and a loaf of bread, and they set out for the great gloomy wood. When they reached it, they saw in front of them, in the thickest part of the wood, a queer little hut. When they looked in, there lay the witch, with her head on the threshold of the door, each foot in a corner of the room, her knees cocked up almost touching the ceiling. "Who's there?" she snarled in an awful voice when she saw the children. They answered civilly, though they were so terrified that they clung to each other. "Good morning, Granny. Our stepmother has sent us to serve you." "See that you do it well, then," growled the witch. "If I am pleased with you, I'll reward you. But if I am not, I'll put you in a pan and fry you in the oven. That's what I'll do. That's what I'll do with you, my pretty dears. You've been gently reared, but you'll find my work hard enough. See if you don't obey me." And so saying, she set the girl to spinning yarn, and she gave the boy a sieve, and in which to carry water from the well, and she herself went out into the wood. As the girl sat at her distaff, weeping bitterly because she did not know how to spin, she heard the sound of hundreds of little feet, and from every hole and corner in the hut, mice came pattering along the floor, squeaking and saying, "Little girl, why are your eyes so red? If you want help, then give us some bread." The girl gave them a large piece of the bread that her grandmother had given her. Then the mice told her that the witch had a cat, and as the cat was very fond of ham, it would show her the way out of the wood. In the meantime, they would spin the yarn for her. So the girl set out to look for the cat, and as she was hunting about, she met her brother, also in great distress, because he could not carry water from the well in a sieve. Naturally, it came pouring out as fast as he put it in. As she was trying to comfort him, they heard a rustling of wings, and a flight of wrens alighted on the ground beside them. The wrens said, "Give us some crumbs, then you need not grieve, for you'll find that water will stay in the sieve." Then the twins crumbled some of their bread on the ground, and the wrens pecked it and chirruped and chirped. When they had eaten the last crumb, they told the boy to fill up the holes of the sieve with clay, and then to draw water from the well. He did as they said and carried the sieve full of water into the hut without spilling a drop. When they entered the hut, the cat was curled up on the floor. They stroked her and fed her with ham. "Pussy, gray pussy," they said to her, "tell us how we are to get away from the witch." The cat thanked them and for the ham, and gave them a pocket handkerchief and a comb, and told them that when the witch pursued them, as she certainly would, All they had to do was to throw the handkerchief on the ground and run as fast as they could. As soon as the handkerchief touched the ground, a deep, broad river would spring up, which would hinder the witch's progress. If she managed to get across it, they must throw the comb behind them and run for their lives. For where the comb fell, a dense forest would spring up, which would delay the witch so long that they would be able to get safely away. The cat had scarcely finished speaking when the witch returned to see if the children had fulfilled their tasks. Well, you have done well enough for today, she grumbled. But tomorrow you'll have something more difficult to do, and if you don't do it well, you pampered brats, straight into the oven you go. Half dead with fright, trembling in every limb, the poor children lay down to sleep on a heap of straw in a corner of the hut. But they dared not close their eyes. Indeed, they scarcely ventured to breathe. Now in the morning, the witch gave the girl the task of weaving 2 pieces of linen before night, and the boy a pile of wood to cut into chips. Then the witch left them to their tasks and went out into the wood. As soon as she was out of sight, the children took the comb and the handkerchief, and hand in hand they ran and ran and ran. First they met the watchdog, who was about to leap on them and tear them to pieces. But they threw him the remains of their bread, and he ate it and wagged his tail. Then they were hindered by the birch trees, whose branches almost put their eyes out. But the little sister tied the twigs together with a piece of ribbon, and they got past safely and came out into the open fields. Now in the meantime, in the hut, the cat was busy weaving the linen and tangling the threads as it wove. Now the witch returned to see how the children were getting on. She crept up to the window and whispered, "Are you weaving, my little dear?" "Yes, Granny, I am weaving," answered the cat. When the witch saw that the children had escaped her, she was furious, and she hit the cat with a porringer. "Why did you let the children leave the hut?" she cried. "Why did you not scratch their eyes out?" The cat curled up its tail and put its back up. "I have served you all these years, and you never even threw me a bone," she said. "But the dear children gave me their own piece of ham." Then the witch was furious as well with the watchdog and the birch trees, because they too had let the children pass. But the dog answered, "I have served you all these years, and you never gave me so much as a hard crust, while the dear children gave me their own loaf of bread." The birch rustled its leaves again and said, "I have served you longer than I can say, and you never even tied a bit of twine round my branches. Yet the dear children bound them up with their brightest ribbons." The witch saw that there was no help to be had from her old servants, and that the best thing she could do was to mount on her broom and set off in pursuit of the children. As the children ran, they heard the sound of the broom sweeping the ground close behind them. They drove the handkerchief down and kept running, or threw the handkerchief down and kept running, and in a moment a deep, broad river flowed behind them. When the witch came to the river, it took her a long time to find a place where she could ford it on her broomstick, but at last she got across and continued to chase faster than before. Now as the children ran, they heard a sound, and the little sister put her ear to the ground and heard the broom sweeping the earth close behind them. So quick as thought, she threw the comb down on the ground, and in an instant, as the cat had said, a dense forest sprang up, in which roots and branches were so closely intertwined that it was impossible to force a way through. Now when the witch came up to it on her broom, she found that there was nothing for it but to turn around and go back to her hut. Now as for the twins, they ran straight on until they reached their own home. There they told their father all that they had suffered, and he was so angry with their stepmother that he drove her out of the house and never let her return. But he and the children lived happily together, and from that time on he took care of them himself, and never let a stranger come near them. All right, tigers stalk the hills and jungles of India, and it is from India that this tale comes. Short it is, but very clever and compact, and within its crisp lines are hidden the essentials of Indian philosophy. For tigers, though beautiful and strong, are also quite stupid. They get caught in cages rather easily, as this tiger did. Also, though beautiful, they are never to be trusted, as the good Brahmin discovered. Good he is, but his very goodness persuades him to act against his better judgment. Pipal tree, buffalo, and road all express the Buddhist doctrine of suffering in life, suffering while serving others, and their acceptance of this fate reveals the Indian acceptance of the hardships of life itself. What then can save the poor Brahmin? Only the lowly jackal, a small wild creature without beauty or strength. He lives by his wits. No one helps him, so he must help himself. Cunning and wily, he persuades the great tiger back into the cage and triumphantly locks him in. The Brahmin goes his way, a wiser man, and the jackal returns to his wild haunts. It is a gem of a tale, a minor gem, perhaps, but it glitters with wit and wile and philosophic suggestion. This is the tale of the tiger, the Brahmin, and the jackal. Now, once upon a time, a tiger was caught in a trap. He tried in vain to get out through the bars and rolled and bit with rage and grief when he failed. By chance, a poor Brahmin came by. "Let me out of this cage, O pious one," cried the tiger. "No, my friend," replied the Brahmin mildly. "You would probably eat me if I did." "Not at all," and the tiger swore many oaths of assurance. "On the contrary, I should be forever grateful and serve you as a slave." Now when the tiger sobbed and sighed and wept and swore, the pious Brahmin's heart softened, and at last he consented to open the door of the cage. Out popped the tiger, and seizing the poor man, he cried, "What a fool you are! What is to prevent my eating you now? After being cooped up so long, I'm terribly hungry." In vain the Brahmin pleaded for his life. The most he could gain was a promise to abide by the decision of the first three things he chose to question as to the justice of the tiger's action. So the Brahmin first asked a pipal tree what it thought of the matter, but the pipal tree replied coldly, "What have you to complain about? Don't I give shade and shelter to everyone who passes by? And don't they in return tear down my branches to feed their cattle? Don't whimper, be a man." Then the Brahmin, sad at heart, went farther afield until he saw a buffalo turning a water wheel. But he fared no better with the beast, for it answered, "You are a fool to expect gratitude. Look at me. While I gave milk, they fed me on cottonseed and oil cake. But now that I am dry, they yoke me here and give me refuse as fodder." The Brahmin, sadder still, asked the road to give him its opinion. "My dear sir," said the road, "how foolish you are to expect anything else. Here am I, useful to everybody, yet all, rich and poor, great and small, trample on me as they go past, giving me nothing but the ashes of their pipes and the husks of their grain." On hearing this, the Brahmin turned back sorrowfully, and on the way he met a jackal who called out, "Why, what's the matter, Mr. Brahmin? You look as miserable as a fish out of water." The Brahmin told him all that had occurred. "How very confusing," said the jackal when the recital was ended. "Would you mind telling me over again, for everything has got so mixed up?" The Brahmin told it all over again, and the jackal shook his head in a distracted sort of way, and still could not understand. "It's very odd," he said sadly, "but it all seems to go in one ear and out the other. I will go to the place where it all happened, and then perhaps I shall be able to give a judgment." So they returned to the cage outside, which the tiger was waiting for the Brahmin and sharpening his teeth and claws. "You've been away a long time," growled the savage beast, "but now let us begin our dinner." "Our dinner," thought the wretched Brahmin, as his knees knocked together with fright. What a remarkably delicate way of putting it. "Give me 5 minutes, my lord," he pleaded, "in order that I may explain matters to the jackal here, who is somewhat slow in his wits." The tiger consented, and the Brahmin began the whole story over again, not missing a single detail and spinning as long a yarn as possible. "Oh, my poor brain, oh, my poor brain," cried the jackal, wringing its paws. "Let me see. How did it all begin? You were in the cage and the tiger came walking by?" Pooh, interrupted the tiger. What a fool you are. I was in the cage. Of course, cried the jackal, pretending to tremble with fright. Yes, I was in the cage. No, I wasn't. Dear, dear, where are my wits? Let me see. The tiger was in the Brahmin and the cage came walking by. No, that's not it either. Well, don't mind me, but begin your dinner, for I shall never understand. Yes, you shall, roared the tiger in a rage at the jackal's stupidity. I'll make you understand. Look here, I'm the tiger. Yes, my lord, and that is the Brahmin. Yes, my lord, and that is the cage. Yes, my lord, and I was in the cage. Do you understand? Yes, no, please, my lord. Well, cried the tiger impatiently. Please, my lord, how did you get in? How? Why, in the usual way, of course. Oh, dear me, my head is beginning to whirl again. Please don't be angry, my lord, but what is the usual way? At this, the tiger lost patience, and jumping into the cage, cried, This way. Now do you understand how it was? Perfectly, said the jackal, grinning as he dexterously shut the door, and if you will permit me to say so, I think matters will remain as they were.